Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us in this afternoon session of the Living with the Water. I'm Suk-jun Kim, or just call me Jun. I'm a professor of music at the University of Aberdeen, and I'm so delighted to be chairing this session by looking at the topics that they'll be discussed and delivered, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And before we start, so I think the norm is that each presenter will give a talk about 15 minutes or so. Then if you have any questions about to the presentation, then please hold on to them, or you can use the chat window if you wish to just throw away your question over there. But we'll have the Q&A session after four presenters have given all the talks after this. So the order today's sessions topic is Anthropocene Waters 1. So that means that we have Anthropocene Waters 2, which I believe in tomorrow. So there are the talks or presentation that are put together under this theme of the Anthropocene Waters, which I personally really am interested in. So without further ado, we can get this going. If you have any questions about technology and aspects, or something does not seem to be working, and you can also use chat, then I believe that Sam will be here for us to figure out all the tech issues. Okay, so let's start our session with the Giorgia and Manfredonia. So I will quickly introduce Giorgia to you, and then she can take over. So Giorgia Manfredonia is a political scientist, non-formal educator, and activist committed to advancing human and modern human rights. She recently earned a master's degree in Latin American Contemporary Studies from the Universidad Complutense de Madrid, with a thesis exploring river rights and eco-political imagination in the context of the Atrato River in Choco, Colombia. During her studies, she conducted fieldwork in Choco as part of a research stay at the National University of Colombia, where she collaborated with the Culture and Environment Water Research Group. Her research interests include ontologies, water, river rights, plural governance of the commons, and practice of resistance, care, and reimagination in wet territories, with a regional focus on both Latin America and the Mediterranean. Her approach is interdisciplinary and grounded in feminist theory. She is currently involved in the Erasmus Plus PSU Go project, titled Education in Living Labs, Participatory Skills for Sustainable Urban Governance at the Department of Architecture, University of Naples, Federico II. This project aims to support the reappropriation, democratization, and restoration of Naples' relationship with the sea through participatory tools and methods. In addition, she works as a non-formal educator with migrant children, fostering inclusive and transformative learning spaces. So Giorgia will give us a presentation on the title of Learning with the Atrato River, Crossing Boundaries and Waving Modern Human Connection with Waters. Please welcome Giorgia to the panel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, June, for your presentation. I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so thank you also, Sam and Julia, and all the participants for opening this space of conversation with Waters. I couldn't attend all the session, but it was very inspiring, and I felt very connected with your works. So I'm going to introduce my research, the research I did for my master thesis. It's the first time I present my work in English, so I will try to do my best, but please let me know if something is not clear. I'm going to introduce myself through the waters that cross me. These waters are the Manzanares River in Madrid, where I did my studies. And this is the place where I started walking and thinking with waters in a more conscious way. There are different bodies of water in Bogota, Colombia, where I did the last year of university and a research stay. And these bodies of water are situated in the places where I used to go every day, like the university, the library, and the park. And it was nice while researching with waters, discovering that I was paying more attention to the water around me and to the bodies of water I was interacting with, not only rivers, but also artificial waters, the rain, and so on. Then there is the Atrato River, which is situated in the western north of Colombia, in the department of Chocó, that is the subject of my research, and the Mediterranean Sea, that is the place where I was born, the place of gestation, but also the place of return, where I'm currently living and working. So these bodies of water they shape my identity. And I think that naming these bodies of water is a way of situating myself, and they form a sort of living archive that reflects my immigration, but also my privilege as white European researcher. And I think that waters have been the body territories where my creating process, my imagination, and also the writing came into life, and where the relationship and struggles that co-constitute me were woven. So the Atrato River flows north in the crossing the department of Chocó, that is one of the most biodiverse and rain-soaked region of the world, and waters are a constant presence in this territory. The 87% of the population of the Chocó department is Afro-descendant, while the 10% is indigenous and only the 3% is mestizo. That's why, as you can see in the map, most of the territory was recognized as a collective territory of Black communities, the pink one, while the blue one are the territory that were recognized as territory of the indigenous populations. The coexistence between differences, also with human and non-human being, is one of the most important features of the Atrato region. And in one of our conversation with Alexander Rodriguez Mena, one of the guardian of the river, he told me, like, we are all from Chocó, but we are different. We are Atrateños, and that's our identity. And I think these words are very important because reveals the importance of the river, not only as physical elements, but also as identitary, cultural, and symbolic subjects. So what is the river, the territorio, as I call it in my thesis? This is an exercise we realized during the field work with young people of different municipalities of the Atrato. And Lucenit Mosquera, another guardian of the river, asked us which elements we identified with. And most of the young people that were participating in the exercise told that the most important element was the Atrato, the river, but also comes up other elements related to traditional practices such as fishing, agriculture, and traditional dance or traditional music. And I think this exercise was very nice because appeared the territory as more than human, political, and historical agency. In my thesis, I use the word territorio, that I think it's nice. It doesn't exist, for example, in Italian, because the word territorio embraces the river, and it allows us to go beyond the separation, for example, between soil and water, between wetlands and lands, and between territory and rivers, and also to connect the defense of the river with the struggle of the community for the protection of the territory. This river was recognized as subject of law with the ruling T-6022 of the Constitutional Court of Colombia in 2016. And this resolution, this recognition was very important because was the response, the institutional response to the struggles of the communities against extractivism and dispossession of their territories. How to listen the territorio. It was the most difficult, I think, part, because I think in many cases, especially in the first stage of research, the institution don't give us the material condition to carry out field work. I stay almost 1 year in Colombia and 2 months in Quibdó, in the Chocó department, but for sure the rhythm of the river is not the rhythm of the academia. And I think that's something very important to reflect on when we are approaching and engaging with non-human beings. Because listening to the river and moving with the river requires time, requires presence, and also requires transdisciplinarity. So it ask us to go to open a little bit the rigid structure of the academia. Here there is a map, because also during the field work, I realized the importance of participatory mapping, of critical pedagogies, and of arts when engaging with the non-human being. And this map, I'm not going to show you because of time, but I put it because it's very interesting, because it shows how the territorialities of Black communities, of indigenous communities, overlap with the territorialities of the armed conflict, of the gold mining, of the administration, of the jurisdiction, and also how in this territory we can conceive the temporalities in a relational way. For example, here we have a definition of territory by the process of Black communities, and they define the territory as a place where mutual relations are woven between past, present, and future time. And I think that's important also to think about how the temporality of coloniality, the temporality of extractivism, and the temporality of gold mining coexist in this territory and produce violence. This is an images of the Quito River, which is one of the tributary of the Atrato River, one of the most affected by the gold mining. This is the images of 1984, and this is the same in 2020. And you can see all these parts are the affectation produces in the river by the gold mining. And this is one of the reasons why the Commission of the Truth, La Comisión de la Verdad, proposed the idea of suffering territory, because it's not only conceiving the territory as a victim of the armed conflict, but as a suffering subjects. And I think that's interesting to think how, even if we don't know how to name the emotions of the river and the suffering of the river, how our memory and our emotion can be connected to the ones of the territory. And that's what we are observing, for example, now with the genocide in Palestine, the destruction of Palestinian territories. And to conclude, here are some lessons I learned from the river, the Atrato river. The first one is that the river invites us to go beyond modern binaries and to move from an anthropocentric to a relational and biocentric paradigm. The second one, connected to the first one, is that waters remind us to make cracks in the structure of the academia and to build bridge between different disciplines. And I would like to recall the invitation of Catherine Walsh to learn, to unlearn, to relearn, to sense, perceive, and grasp the light and life that appear despite the solidity of the wall, in this case, the academia, and to think our work not just within the cracks, but as part of the crack making. And I think that waters are teaching us how to make cracks, and this space, like this seminar, are part of this process of crack making. And at the end, the waters also create and reactivate new imaginaries, and that's what the communities of the Atrato River are doing. They are imagining new non-extractive, participatory, and care-based future based on the idea of plural governance. Thank you so much. I'm sorry if I pass a little bit with the time, and I would like to later in the Q&A session listen about your question and also the challenges you face during investigating and engaging with non-human beings. Thank you.
Thanks, Giorgia. That's wonderful, very succinct the presentation. Already the round of applause are coming in. So I have, I'm sure you will have many questions. I also jot down some notes, and then I have some questions as well. But just put those questions in your mind until the Q&A section comes. So we'll move on to the next presenter. So next presenter is Janet Tryner. So I will quickly introduce her to you. So Janet Tryner is an artist and independent researcher based in West Midlands. Through her practice, she investigates the phenomenology of waste and creaturely activity of littering. She has recently completed a BA Contemporary Art and Archaeology. She exhibits nationally, and recent work includes a cabinet of renegotiation at East Side Projects, which is 2024, Blue Rack and cabinets of renegotiation at both Coventry Biennale of Contemporary Art 2023 and mapping slothing. Okay. So, mapping slothing and you can trust in pioneer plants at Ecofeminism 2023, Baskets Without Desire 2023, and Polygars in 2021. A publication titled Cracks in the Moon and Aliens in the Sand is available at Paul Mellon Center Library. Please welcome Janet Tryner for the next presentation.
Thank you, June. Right, I'm just going to share this, and I've shared the sound and optimized video, so hopefully this works. So you should be able to see something moving around on the screen. So I'm going to assume that that's working. So, so my presentation comes from my master's thesis, which I finished this year, which is about Calthemite, and the best way of describing what that is visually. So this is a 3D polycam scan, and it was taken from some Calthemite under a concrete pedestrian bridge over Coventry's Ring Road. So Coventry is a Midlands city. It was suffered a lot of destruction in World War II and was rebuilt in concrete like many other cities around the world. I'll stop that now, otherwise it will get right. Okay, so so what you get is water that seeps through concrete, and then a deposit builds up that in this case has created straw-like shapes. And it also builds up in other ways as flowstone and on the ground below. So the term used in biogeomorphology is pseudokarst, karst being limestone, calcium carbonate. And I've felt over time this project that this term kind of pits human entropy against the lithic mutability. And it's just another form of karst formation. So you might find stalactites, stalagmites, flowstones in limestone caves and calthemites in cities. They're all speleothems, to give it a scientific term, and they all form a trace of water flow. But there are some differences to calthemites. They form a lot more quickly, very quickly, centimeters in a year, and they're much more fragile as a result. And they are much more diverse in content because they're in anthropic space, which is a space of very diverse matters, and they combine and stick with other substances. So I started the project by looking at 3 different locations of calthemite in Coventry. So this one is underneath a concrete balcony. It's now unused. It's barriered off, which is attached to a hotel. And there is deposit that has developed underneath it, and that, because that's falling onto a garden, you've got leaves and things in there as well. So I thought a good way of demonstrating is to show you another video. And so that is a scan, so we get closer and closer. So this is a bit of video that shows you the things that can get captured inside. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about how the project began. So I've been interested in the experience of human space for a while by anything other than human. And I'd made a soundscape from the point of view of a bridge that is over Coventry's Ring Road. And I'd seen there this combining of minute matters by going into parts of the bridge with a digital microscope, a handheld one. And I was interested in this sense of matters accumulating with and beyond anthropic intervention. What were their recent pasts? Where did they come from? And why was this act of sticking together really interesting to me? So when I started, I was thinking solely about matter. What became so interesting was that time and focus really broke down the boundaries between different kinds of matter. I was then encouraged to speak in this program, or to apply, by my supervisor, because he thought of it as blocky waters, which I quite liked, and that it inspired other ideas as well. So I've been influenced a lot by studies in sub-archaeology field of contemporary archaeology, as projects like the archaeology of Burning Man, the rise and fall of Black Rock City, that traces all of the materials that gather for that event and then leave again. And that movement of stuffs across the surface of the world really interests me. It's another way of studying turbulence in the Earth's surface. And so the MA involved this merging of art and archaeology fields, and despite all the way those cross over, I remain an artist. I'm not an archaeologist in any sense, really. And being in the field of the subject and then trying to find ways around what is very confusing and sometimes obscure kind of existence is what really interests me. So looking at calthemite led towards the urban anthropic ecosystem involving stone and water, where there's many kinds of matter flow and intersect, including different waters and wastes. And I ended up making a set of graphic cards as a research tool, and that became the outcome of the project at this point. So calthemite forms in 2 different ways. from water seeping through cracks in old and damaged concrete, but there is a biogenic process as well of lime secreting organisms, bacteria. They make water as they consume calcium carbonate. It's the same process that creates stromatolite, the lava chimneys that you find on the ocean bed. So it's a fundamental process of matter created on Earth. So we're in an anthropic stage of karst production because human activity has brought together all the materials needed to make concrete and mortar. And although concrete as a building material is old, we know the Romans used it and it still exists, their buildings still exist, and it forms naturally. We're living in a period of huge concrete use, obviously. So calthemites, as it is most often studied, is considered a symptom of degraded concrete, evidence of unwanted entropy and a nuisance. For example, I came across a concrete development website that described the biochemical process of lime as producing a spare water molecule, as if there could be such a thing as a spare water molecule. So largely scientific research happens in biogeomorphology, and there is quite a lot of developing work on how pseudokarsts present in different polluted airs. But it doesn't happen much in humanities, so I felt there was a bit of a gap there. And my approach was to consider calthemite as essential matters and essential entities, and I wanted to study them as traces, from an archaeology point of view, and what did they mean to me personally, and how are we connected to each other. And what I was getting toward this point was thinking of calthemite as a creative force that could become a mentor to me in mine. And I'm influenced by Jane Bennett's use of the words walking, talking minerals. I wanted to think about there being a relationship between us as agental bodies, that we can both be and do, and we share a world where we have some similarities in our experience. For example, we both do better under an overhang, and we need water running through our bodies to exist. And I also took a lot from Robin Wall Kimmerer's grammar of animacy, which pitches a space for entities to have experience and feeling, and to put that back into language. There's also this really interesting factor, which I encountered a lot in people's attitude towards calthemite, if they thought about it at all. That I thought was really interesting as an artist. To find a strong feeling about something is always a good clue, as it will be an interesting thing. So I found a lot of useful thinking in Mark Fisher's writing on Freud's uncanny and his characterization of the weird as there being more present than expected, which goes some way to explain that kind of creepy finger look they have on buildings. And also that sort of buildup of deposit looks a bit like skin, or the building is oozing. And that doesn't just unsettle ideas of human permanence, like that long gone kingdom built by Ozymandias in Shelley's poetry. But they don't so much crumble, those old buildings, as they sort of rebuild themselves again, which I think is more unsettling a thought. So stone, it's like anything else, it carries on being what it is, no matter where it is or whatever it encounters. And I came to think about calthemite as all about encounters, and that we encountered each other in the space of learning, which is where the mentorship came about in the sort of the title of my project. To move on, there we go. I came to think about them as encounters, and the microscopic images are from the same location as this 3D scan, which is here. And actually I need to move on slightly in it to get it to the right spot. There we go. Right, okay. So in a moment, it'll show there's particles of dust and tire and pollens and microplastics. And there is a pebble that pops up occasionally as well, which is covered with calthemite deposit, and that in a way gets to spread it around the surface of the earth. It moves. So all matters are caught up in the earth's flows at some point, and they combine with others. And I became aware of plastic glomerates, the newly designated geology that is formed in beach fires from ocean-borne waste and sand. And calthemite struck me as very similar in a way, in that it becomes this inseparable matter. But it also can make you aware of Earth's flows of matter. Interestingly, it's quite quick to form, centimeters in a year. And it was interesting to compare. Anisha, I need to go back and compare how much they have grown or how they look this year, which has been very dry in the UK, or certainly around in the West Midlands, and last year where it was really wet. So I started to think of it having this sticky and also serendipitous character, happy to combine with anything that came along that was small enough and would stick to it. And perhaps I now prefer Robin Wall Kimmerer's choice of the word animacies, to say that everything sits at different stages in the same continuum. Inanimacies, traces, dead matters, they're all sticky and unavoidable processes of life, but I've kept the title. It's not quite perfect, but perhaps that's unavoidable. But as the project went through, I started to look for other encounters. And I was planning to research, here we go, there we go, local quarries that were active in the 50s and 60s that would have produced the concrete that ended up in Coventry. But then I had an opportunity to visit this concrete plant, which is in Rugby. It's Cemex Rugby. And here I encountered some really interesting flows of crossing matter. They make Portland cement, slightly different recipe to the stuff that ended up in Coventry. And they use a local lias clay and chalk from Kensworth chalk pit on the Dunstable Downs, and that arrives via a 57-mile long buried high pressure pipeline. It sort of goes along the route of the M1, which is a main motorway arterial route through the UK, and that's one flow of matter. It is 30% water, and that water is added from sewage works at Kensworth and is drained at another near the plant in Rugby. So there's another obvious encounter with human flows. So the materials used in cement production were handed around during the presentation when I visited the factory. So there is the chalk, and there's a steel ball for grinding. What was really interesting was the kinds of fuel that they used. They used to use coal, but it's until the stockpile ran out and it became too expensive to import from Norway or South Africa. And then they moved to different kinds of fuel, firstly old tires, and now they use this, which was a real surprise to me at the time. So this is a trademarked fuel made from inseparable polythene from domestic waste. It's called climber fuel. And they get paid to burn this, mostly because they don't really want to use it because it so negatively affects their carbon debt. And there are so many issues around this. Air pollution, it's close to housing, the manufacture of inseparable plastics, most of them are crude oil derived. So alongside the misnaming of the practice as burning, it's actually burning a fossil fuel derivative. Carbon dioxide production. There isn't carbon capture at the plant at the moment because it's not well suited, although they're planning for it. And the investment in climate change adaptation seems to require a concrete infrastructure driven by the burning of fossil fuel. And there's a lack of clarity around these processes. It also illustrates the invisible interconnectedness of anthropic matter flows. And that's where the project suddenly became personal to me, because I'm trying to separate all this waste that goes through my home, although I tried to cut down, it inevitably goes through. And so I felt like I was witnessing this flow of matters from me toward the creation of future Calthemite. I wanted to make an artwork out of it, but I found it very difficult to get hold of any post-production and pre-burning climate fuel. So instead I decided that I'd try and trace the 57-mile pipeline, because the wet slurry is propelled through it with turbulence. So I thought there'd be some sound. So I decided to listen to it and take field sound recordings. So that started a bit of an odyssey through the Midland landscape. So here are images of some of the markers I found. There's a lot that I didn't find, and some trips were more successful than others. So it wasn't easy because the route isn't made public. It's counts as a national infrastructure, so it's available, but you need to pay. I use internet searches, and one of the ones was I found a single image of a marker in a field in Northamptonshire, which I then found again. And I did record it, and this is the recording. Not very long. But that's the only recording I've actually there was also an archaeological survey, but that did not help me find it. And otherwise, I just used sort of educated guesswork and a lot of old OS maps, which could show me where the land and where building had changed, where roads had moved, and where the pipeline possibly crossed bridges, crossed other flows of water where it might be attached to bridges, because it only really comes to air where it's got to cross an older flow of water. There was a point, though, that I exhausted all options, but didn't have enough recordings. So the pipe in Rugby that I did find. You can see a lot of images here, and you can see the pipe on the lower picture. But it was near such a noisy road that it wasn't really possible to get a decent quality recording. But this sort of ended in failure. But it started me thinking about serendipity and flowing matters meeting each other, and how stickiness manifested in it sort of rubbing up against each other, matters rubbing up against each other. Something that might not produce physical evidence, but instead change the direction of flow. And that flow would be me walking around trying to find it. And that eventually led to thinking about how serendipity worked in a pack of tarot cards, which is also, there we go, a tightly bounded flow. There's only so many options within a pack, but then they also become connected outside their flow when they're used, and the circumstances of reading is always different. And that's sort of what I needed to happen. So I made a set of 16 cards, and they all represent common threads of connection that I found within the project. And I whittled those down and then separated them out again. And an example of that is the cards that are flow, change, and wetness. So this became an artwork and a research tool, to supplement my own sort of very over-focused tunnel vision kind of observation when I'm out in the field and there is so much going on. And I tested it with Calthemite in Coventry, which produced this sort of, I had begun to then think about it as a Calthemite ecosystem. There is sort of water within that system that lasts longer than rainfall. So it enables insects and birds to have a sort of stretched out water source. So it has that sort of extended rain effect. And it makes me look differently. And it also allowed me to sort of navigate this archive of stuff that I'd built up over sort of the walks and the photos and the images and the sound recordings I'd made. The project as a whole, really sort of the lessons I learned were, it helped me come to understand what I meant by sticky Inanimacies. So there's these boundaries and categorizations of matter between stone and water, and life sort of dissolved under these states of stickiness between them. And it also came to describe another kind of existence that I share with Calthemitic, which is coexistence with a continuum of ever-changing sets of possibilities. And that is where I can leave this, I think. Hopefully I haven't gone over time.
Thanks, Janet. Please give us a round of applause for Janet. So Janet, the presentation, the title was Calthemitic Sticky Thinking, Investigating Mentorship by Creative Inanimacies. I forgot to mention that before I introduced the panel. But you see that in a Hollywood film, they start with film without giving you a title, and then title comes at the back. So it's in a way kind of a pre-planned, I guess. Okay, so yes, very interesting the presentations, and wonderful work you have done. And I think there are some commonalities that I could find between Giorgia's work and Janet's work there. So I will hold on to my my comments until the end. But let's move on to the next presentation. So the next presenter is Dr. Trang. So I will quickly introduce Trang to the audience. Trang completed a PhD in Arts and Humanities from Nottingham Trent University, and previously graduated from Oxford Brookes University with a BA and an MA in English Literature. Funded by the Vice Chancellor's Studentship Scheme. Her PhD project focuses on Jeff Vandermeer's eco-weird fiction, exploring narratives of dark ecology and coexistence between humans and non-humans through the lenses of objective-oriented philosophy and the Anthropocene discourse. She has published on the topics of animal studies, American contemporary culture, contemporary critical theory on the Anthropocene and queer ecology. Trang will be presenting a talk on the title of Nuoc 2030, Oceanic Temporality and the Impossibility of Hope. Trang, your presentation.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I thought I could speak for 20 minutes, so we'll see how I do with time. But also, the title does not really reflect now the actual content of the presentation.
Sorry, Trang, not to cut you off, but just 20 is fine. As I said in the chat, sorry, we gave out contradictory information, so some people would have preferred peanuts on 20, but it's totally okay. We've got time for it. So go ahead.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, yeah, I'll just see. But yeah, I might have to cut some of the content. But so yes, as June introduced, my presentation today. Hang on, I need to share my screen actually. It's been a while. Can you see my screen? Perfect. Yeah. So yeah, my presentation today focuses on Nuoc 2030, and it's the first Vietnamese sci-fi film which came out in 2014 and is directed by Vietnamese-American filmmaker Nghiêm Minh Nguyễn Võ. So the film imagines a near future Vietnam drastically reshaped by climate change, particularly rising sea levels, and that has submerged much of the south. So this talk will explore the film's portrayal of the changing relationship between coastal communities, multinational corporations, and the sea itself. Throughout, I'll situate my analysis of the film in the context of Vietnam's colonial past and developmental present, and draw on critical perspectives from the blue humanities and the Anthropocene discourse. So this presentation is based on a research article that I wrote for a special issue, and I'm quite new to this field. So if you have any questions, please be gentle with them, but any comments and feedback would be very much welcome. So in terms of the presentation outline, I borrowed Potawatomi botanist Rimgor Kimura concept of time, where she compares time to the tides of the sea that appear and disappear because of her people. Time is not linear, but a turning circle. So in the first part, I'll explore the themes of human resilience and adaptation in Nuoc 2030, highlighting the loss of land, food sources, and biodiversity. And then in the second part, I'll examine the film's depiction of the exploitation of locals and marine life by big companies and scientists, also paying particular attention to how their past action impinge on the health of the country ocean and that of the people in the present and future. And the presentation will then conclude with a critique of the portrayal of hope and responsibility in Nuoc 2030, examining how its fluid depiction of time and surreal projection of the sea unknown gesture towards alternative ways of thinking and living with water. So moving on to the first part, after a prologue telling viewers that in 2030, 80% of the population has been evacuated from South Vietnam. The film then presents us with a close-up dead body slowly sinking to the bottom of a beautiful, I guess, kind of turquoise sea. And for me, this initial 30-second clip is very powerful and rich in meaning because it kind of set the stage for and encompasses all of the themes that the film tries to explore. So the deceased body belonged to Thi, the husband of the female protagonist, Sao, and it marks the first of many losses of life, land, connection, and biodiversity. At the same time, the brief sequence shows a striking sense of calm and beauty as well. So Thi's lifeless body outstretched appears at ease in the water, yet with the sea completely kind of enveloping him entirely, it becomes clear that this environment is also equally perilous. As Demons observed, humans and water shares an awkward relationship. Quote, we depend upon it and love it, well, it cannot be our home, unquote. So given this difficult cohabitation, Nguyen asks how we might navigate the sea when it's reclaiming the land in range. Another theme that implied in this short scene, which the second part of the presentation will explore in a bit more detail, is a tension between truth and lie, because the questions surrounding the cause of Thi's death surface as his body slowly descends into the ocean. But for now, I'll focus on the themes of loss and adaptation in Nuoc 2030. So to further emphasize the pain of Thi's death, the film revisits the time shortly before the tragedy, conveying the life of the married couple as it once was. So introduced by the title card, Sao and Thi, the sequence opens with the couple aboard a boat gathering their meager catch. The camera then pulls back to reveal a picturesque panoramic shot of Thi returning to their makeshift stilt house where his land used to be. With the image of the calm sea against the blue sky, the imagery may appear very much idyllic, but visual details suggest something else. It's clear that Thi and Sao were worn out clothes in the previous scene, and later scene also shows them tending to just one single pot of vegetables that they have. Then access to water is so limited that they have to use sparingly. So in his discussion of mainstream Western cinema, J.P. Tillett argues that through their visual effects, science fiction films are capable of visualizing what could be, and in that process illustrate the real possibility of other worlds and alternative worlds existing. But despite Nuoc's 2030 near-future setting, this sequence seems to just portray what looks like an ordinary life of a married couple living in poverty in the global south. As Azila Hayes rightly observes, Whitworth cinematically projects a theoretical argument made by indigenous and post-colonial scholars. What the North see as a future climate dystopia is already a present reality in the global south, shaped by colonial legacies and ongoing struggles. So the scene's tranquil beauty then marks a second loss, the loss of Thi's land and also the couple's daily struggles. The adaptation to survive reveal a deep layer of material hardship, highlighting the lived precarity that climate change continues to expose. So through the scene depicting the couple's struggle to adapt to life on a boat and other similar ones, Nuoc 2030 underscores yet another form of loss, the depletion of food sources and biodiversity. So scattered throughout the film are moments that draw attention to the diminishing fish population. So at one point you see the scene, Thi tells Sao that every day there are fewer fish, no more land, people all go fishing to survive. And then in another, Sao casts her net only to pull in plastic waste. Bodhisattva Tayopate notes that food insecurity, driven by overpopulation and climate disruptions like flooding, is a recurring theme in global South science fiction narratives. And this aligns with Chen Feng's findings, which highlight the Mekong Delta's vulnerability to flooding and agricultural decline. By depicting present-day food scarcity projected into the future, Wittenwald reveals a worsening crisis where traditional fishers are pushed aside by commercial trawlers and survival-driven competition. This trajectory becomes more evident in a later segment of the film, set a decade earlier, where viewers are offered glimpses of a more biodiverse ocean. So as you can see here in beautifully shot underwater scenes, sea urchins and tiny fish swim between murky currents, and the presence of rocks bound with human-made ropes here kind of suggests a web entanglement, symbolizing the inextricable relationship and shared vulnerability between human and marine life. The contrast between these life-filled water, the past, and the fish-depleted future accentuates what we have lost due to anthropogenic global warming. And water then in this scene becomes both a medium, but also a witness that holds memory and testifies not only to the disappearance of biodiversity, but also to the vanishing of food sources that the ocean has so generously given humankind. So moving on to the second part of the presentation, I'll examine how the film highlights the troubling reality of escalating extractive activities of multinational corporations in Vietnam, often disguised as green innovation. And this theme is demonstrated in two pivotal scenes where Sao and Trang, who is Thi's brother, confront local authority about the truth behind Thi's death. So in this scene here, an official coldly declares that Thi drowns and dismisses any further questioning from his wife. And then in the second scene, which is a very dark scene, Sao bribes the official to get to talk to Trang, who's now been bitten and bruised. Tang's revealed that Zhang, who is a research student, later revealed to be Sao's ex-lover and now married to the daughter of a corporate magnate, to secure his position within the floating farm enterprise, had Thi killed for stealing genetically modified seed intended for black market sale. Ian Zung links such corruption to Vietnam's history under French colonial rule and subsequent wars, where centralized colonial rules fostered bureaucratic control and normalized practices like bribery and nepotism, dynamics that are still entrenched in modern governance in the country today. So the film's, can you still hear me? I think, oh, okay, perfect. So the film's critique of market-driven self-interest also extends to the theme of ownership that questions whether knowledge, especially rooted in communal interest, should be monopolized or shared. So this is highlighted when Zhang, so the person that's freshly killed Thi, presents a seaweed discovery to Tang, which is the company he now works at, claiming personal credit that he found this seaweed. But earlier scenes show that it was actually Sao's local place-based knowledge that led to the finding. Writing on Vietnamese eco-fiction, Thi Pham notes that post-colonial Vietnamese state building has long relied on colonial modes of producing scientific and ethnic knowledge for the purposes of social engineering. But at the same time, it discredits and pushes their local ecological knowledge to the margin of the country's post-war pursuit of development and industrial socialism. In this light, Thi's death, supposedly for stealing seeds that emerged from communal knowledge, become a deeper provocation. Who truly owns this knowledge, and can it ever be rightfully treated as private property? So alongside the privatization of resources and marginalization of vulnerable groups in Nuoc 2030, it's the kind of enduring force of capitalist exploitation and environmental activism. Vietnam's push for industrialization and urbanization, meant to overcome post-war poverty, reflects a post-colonial drive for progress and a colonial legacy. As Hayes and Pham argue, French colonial ideology, framing non-human life as poverty to be controlled and commodified, continue to shape Vietnam's current political economy, now reconfigured through both socialist and capitalist logics. This inherited approach and dominant narrative of national advancement have made it difficult for ecological issues to gain meaningful traction in public discourse or policy in the country, as they're often seen as secondary to economic growth and prosperity. So in this light, Vietnam's development model, which echoes global North industrial thinking era, introduces new risk to already vulnerable human and non-human communities. Nuoc 2030 then critiques both the colonial roots of climate injustice and the complicity of the global South in environmental degradation. While acknowledging Vietnam's lesser role, the film highlights its participation in extractive systems, and this further demonstrated by the Sao and Zhang's act, where Tang, his brother, questions Zhang's intention when he first comes to the village to do some research, and Tang expresses local distrust towards scientists and corporations after a past pollution incident at Soi Dap River. So this brief exchange reflects broader concerns about exploitative interventions, often masked as progress. So here, corporations and scientists are portrayed as arriving in vulnerable regions, carrying out experiments and leaving devastation in their wake as they disregard both the lives of local people and the integrity of their non-human ecosystems. And rather than protecting and advancing local communities, that thing capitalizes on climate crisis for profit. The film then challenges viewers to question greenwashed corporate narratives and the myth of technological salvation that often conceal deeper exploitative systems. The indifference of multinational corporations to human and ecological suffering is also highlighted when Zhang reveals that the genetically engineered crops developed by the rare seaweed I mentioned are in fact harmful to human health. However, the Daitang corporations actively suppresses this information as they prioritize profit over safety. And to me, this moment evokes Jason Moore's concept of cheap nature, where both people and ecosystems are treated as expendable under capitalism. Similarly, Daitang reduces non-human seaweed and the people who consume and cultivate it to mere instruments of economic gain, valuable only in their capacity to serve capital. Through layered flashbacks, particularly the decade-old conversation between Zhang and Tang about the incident at the river, and the scenes set in near future, now dominated by the corporation's floating farms, Nguyen further emphasizes how corporate actions in the past continue to shape and damage the future. So to conclude, Nuoc 2030 offers a layered portrayal of life for the poor in the global South, highlighting both the losses they endure and their resilience in a submerged world. And through temporal shift, evocative seascapes and intimate close-ups, Nguyen Vu's craft a visual language of survival and grief. The film contrasts the daily struggles of characters like Sao and Thi with scenes of corruption and exploitation, revealing how multinational corporations, echoing colonial logics, can modify nature and local knowledge. From Sao's dismissal by authority to Zhang's rise in the company through nepotism and Daitang's appropriation of indigenous knowledge, Nuoc 2030 exposes the collusion between capitalism, state power, and post-colonial hierarchies. While acknowledging the lasting impact of colonialism, the film also critiques Vietnam's own role in ecological degradation, urging introspection within the global South on how internal corruption, unchecked development, and economic ambition perpetuate environmental and social harm. So portraying the dominance of private interests and their far-reaching influence over South Vietnam, Nuoc 2030 could be read as kind of offering a really pessimistic vision of the future. And this reading certainly could be true, especially considering the film's final sequence, where Zhang and Sao descend into a submersible to witness a submerged Ho Chi Minh City, which is the second largest city in Vietnam, with skyscrapers still flickering beneath the water. And this surreal image visualizes what Support Opperman describes as the water's geopolitical agency, capable of erasing human-made infrastructures and boundaries. So from a non-anthropocentric perspective, however, the scene offers another layer of interpretation. So Sidney Dobrin compellingly argues that land underwater is no longer human habitable land, yet its value is altered and maintained in ecological systems. In this magical underwater moment, fish glide to a sunken bookshop and at one point swim past the book titled 2022. And these details, the bookshop and the book itself, actually appear earlier in the film's South and Zhang section, set 10 years before Nuoc 2030 starts. And back then, the bookshop was still above the water, and Sao worked there as a waitress and showed the book to 2022 to Zhang, her ex-lover. And when asked what he could write about the future, Zhang replies, "I will write that the sea level will rise and submerge this coffee shop and this bookshelf too." To which Sao's after that, then the fish will come and read the books too, just like ecologists trying to study lost civilizations. This jarring moment where the future collides with the past reverses the anthropocentric gaze, which is that Sao's recognition of non-human agency and her and Zhang's imagination actually materialize. How it's indeed the non-human now that observes the remnants of human civilization rather than humans studying it. The scene also projects an unnerving vision of near-future Vietnam as it shows submerged human infrastructure, a haunting emblem of human hubris, now rendered obsolete by rising seas. Nuoc 2030 is therefore cautiously optimistic, clearly for the future of the non-human. Despite the challenges posed by anthropogenic global warming, it still may find its way to survive and adapt. But for that of humanity, survival requires a fundamental shift in how we relate to the planet. And this message is seemingly reinforced in the ambiguous panoramic final scene, where Sao and Zhang lie together on the sand after the water has receded. And considering Zhang's alleged involvement in her husband's death, it suggests a reconciliation between the two, and more broadly, gesture towards the possibility of hope, grounded in the necessity of compromise and a shared commitment to transformation. The film then critiques both the exploitative legacy of the global north and the internal issues within the global south, highlighting the importance of confronting corruption, inequality, and misuse of power. So it emphasizes that environmental justice requires accountability across geopolitical boundaries and calls for urgent internal reform, advocating for a collective international approach to address climate change. And that's the end of my presentation. I hope I didn't go too much over time. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Trang. Round of applause for Trang. It's yes, fascinating. The presentation, and the film was when was the film again? 2000.
So it came out in 2014.
Okay, it's a while ago. Okay, yes, yeah. We can talk more about those then during the Q&A session. But let's move on to the last, but not the least. The presenter. So I would like to introduce the Dr. Kate Ostrom quickly, and then I will hand over to you, Kate. So Dr. Kate Ostrom is a PhD candidate in the Department of Classical and Modern Languages and Literatures and Cultures at Wayne State University in Detroit and Michigan. Her research focuses on the 20th and the 21st century Latin American and Latinx literatures and cultures, the environmental humanities and eco-critical studies, labor history, and border studies. Her current project analyzes the U.S.-Mexico border space from an environmental humanities perspective, tracing the loss that occurs in the borderscapes through an eco-critical perspective of U.S. Latinx, Mexican, Mexican-American, and borderland texts and aesthetic representations. Kate is a 2024-25 Rumble Fellowship recipient and holds an MA from the University of Houston and a BA from the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. So her presentation title is "The Border Makes the River Disappear: River Ecologies and Agencies in the U.S.-Mexico Borderlands." I will hand over to you, Kate.
Thank you so much. And I did just graduate, so it's fine. Okay. Thanks, everyone. This is part of a obviously larger project on my dissertation, but also I'm thinking a border river project. There are more rivers along the U.S.-Mexico border than just the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, but this is what I focus on here. I'm also working on Arizona borders as well. I began this project in a culvert. In June 2010, 15-year-old Mexican teen Sergio Adrian Hernandez Guerreca was fatally shot by United States Border Patrol agent Jesus Mesa Jr. while playing on the Mexican side of a concrete culvert embankment that covered the river Rio Grande, Rio Bravo that marked the U.S.-Mexico border between El Paso, Ciudad Juarez. According to border agent Mesa, Sergio was pelting rocks at him before running back over to the Mexican side of the culvert. Sergio's parents maintained that Sergio was playing a game, one familiar to him and his friends born and raised on the border river. Racing up the steep concrete sides of the culvert embankment toward the U.S. side, briefly touching their fingers to the portending dividers, and then scampering back down to the Mexican side of the expansive concrete space, breathless. Though the Rio Grande Rio Bravo was the official border marker, at the time of Sergio's crossing, the river had largely dried up. The sprawling, and you can see that in the photo, the sprawling concrete culvert that covered both sides of the embankment marked the only visible signs of crossing. For Sergio, this was the border. The chain link fencing and posts at the tops of either side of the wide swath of concrete were the only physical sign of a boundary. The Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 decision that Sergio's family could not seek justice on either U.S. or Mexican soil in the tragic incident, and the question of the physical border was central to the case. But where exactly was the border in this concrete culvert embankment? Was the border the post that Sergio would have seen in his border game? Was it the middle of the culvert itself, despite no clear dividing marker? Was it the river, even if the river was disappearing? Or was it the undefined space in between, this nebulous, lawless, and empty state of exception, now considered a new setting of the border? The story of Sergio and the culvert brings to mind the question, is a river still a river if it is a border? As El Paso Chicano storyteller and cartoonist Zeke Peña writes in his visual text River Stories, quote, "The border makes the river disappear." The disappearance of U.S.-Mexico border rivers and landscapes can be traced to the 21st century rise in the militarization and authoritarian creep of infrastructure at the U.S.-Mexico border, and is part of a larger project of terraformation and erasure of the physical borderlands themselves. The militarization and hijacking of borderscapes is nowhere more clear than in the riverscapes of these contested, drying up, and disappearing Rio Grande, Rio Bravo. From first contact with conquistador expeditions when the river was known as Rio de las Palmas, to present-day bids to build a river wall with buoys and barbed wire as part of the $11 billion Operation Lone Star Border Security Plan out of Texas in 2021, the river has long been battleground for migratory and environmental conflicts alike. Totaling some 1,900 miles from start to finish and moving through 5 Mexican states and 3 from the US, the river winds through forests, deserts, and stunning canyons, from the binational Chihuahuan Desert to Big Bend State and National Parks, as well as through the Rio Grande Wild and Scenic River. The river's history is rife with indigenous migration, settlements, conquistador expeditions, battles, colonizations, farming, flooding, damming, industry, pollution, draining, pumping, trading, and human and more than human crossings and movements. The river is fluid lifeline for cottonwood forests, migratory bird species, and in some cases, it is the only water source for borderlands communities and farms. Throughout time, the river has also been a site of joy, barbecues, swimming, birding, playground, festivals, artwork, and literature. As Javier Gallegos reiterates, quote, "It was the original park," end quote. As weaponized river in the prevention through deterrence era of U.S. immigration policy of the 1990s, the river forms part of what is known as, quote, "the funnel effect," where border crossers are diverted from common crossing port cities and forced to cross, often ill-equipped, through more remote zones, which include into the river's waters. According to a report from 2017 to 2023, at least 1,107 people have drowned crossing the river. Deaths were at an all-time high in 2022, and in 2023, 1 out of every 10 drownings was a child. But the migratory crisis is not the only crisis along this riverscape. If we speak of crisis here, we must also speak of water access, water quality, water quantity, water flow, wastewater, and more. Water is and will be for the foreseeable future the most pressing, yet most underreported environmental issue for all border dwellers, crossers, and beyond in the 21st century in U.S.-Mexico border regions. Over contested multiple and binational histories, the river has suffered from overuse, drought, and contentious water rights negotiations, end quote. The river provides some 15 million people with clean water, is home to species found nowhere else on Earth and hosts migrating bird species from around the world, but the river has essentially become over-allocated due to drought and binational increased water demand. The original 1944 water treaty promises more water than the river can supply. The battles for water rights are just beginning to simmer beneath the surface as the river's future is looking more and more bleak. Some even warn of a blooming water war between the United States and Mexico in the very near future, and we're already seeing signs of that in the US press. Indeed, the state of the water crisis at present, quote, pits humanitarian needs for water in the US against those in Mexico, end quote. Coupled with climate change, the river is facing one of the most contentious and stressful periods in its millions of years of evolutionary history. Scientists predict that by the 2030s, climate change will reduce the water's flow by 4 to 14% and 8 to 29% by the 2080s. Many believe 0 hour has arrived for this storied river. While many argue that borders are just illusory lines drawn on human-constructed maps, the ecological multi-species tales of the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo River, and other US-Mexico border rivers demonstrate that borderlines have very real consequences. They are very real limits of resources, movements, and extractions. In the case of Sergio, border lines drawn on maps and dissing rivers of the climate crisis mean the difference between life and death, justice and murder. The border and all of its very real issues truly make the river and river life disappear. River stories of the borderlands, however, offer counter narrations of movement, connection, attending to physical environments of more than human water cycles reaffirms what scientists have long known about bodies of water. They exert their own aesthetic agency as active flows that move, sound, and sculpt other material bodies to create territories, end quote. Reading rivers as text environments with aesthetic agency both challenges human-centric narratives as well as seeks co-constructive reconsiderations for riverscapes as multi-being flourishings and water sources amidst climate crisis. Here, in this presentation, I focus on just the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo. There are, of course, other US-Mexico river borders, and read river text through a new materialist liquid ecologies lens to suggest that the river both permeates beings and is a vibrantly alive agentic being of their own. I move through 2 river texts here, specifically Carlos Fuentes' short story, Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, and Zeke Peña's comic collection, River Stories, from 2023, and the Fuentes short stories from 1995, originally published. While militarized borders and border construction attempt to erase the river completely, these co-constructed human river texts urgently connect humans to more than human vibrant and animated river worlds in a fraught time of climate crisis and separation between humans and border landscapes. In flowing through these river texts and the multi-species bodies that co-constitute them, the river is both agent and storyteller that ebbs and flows with interwoven human and more than human river stories that resist erasure and ecological loss. Mexican author Carlos Fuentes' La Frontera de Cristal is a river text. This transnational composite novel is told through 9 stories culminating in Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, a story that weaves its way through river bodies and beings across time and space. Told through a collective of voices, the river is a multi-being, agential, porous riverscape that moves through bodies in a process of what Stacey Alamo calls transcorporeality. In thinking with the river here, quote, the figure-ground relation between the human and the environment dissolves as the outline of the human is traversed by substantial material interchanges, end quote. In the text, bodies and rivers are in constant flux, exchange, and movement with one another. Throughout the riverscape text environment, we see transcorporeal relationships between the movements of both the human and fluvial waters of the river through several narrative strategies, a composite novel told through the multiplicity of voices, including the voices of the river, fluvial sentence structure, run-on sentences, and a collective memory that the river both evokes and collects through movement. Rio Grande, Rio Bravo is the only text in the novel where the river takes over and narrates their stories in their own fluvial voice, told in poetic, italicized offset text that speaks in what some have argued is a mythical voice of Mexican history, but what I argue here is the agential co-creative voice of the river, narrating their own contested and overlapping histories. For example, quote, llegaron el caballo, el cerdo, el ganado, las ovejas, llegaron el acero y la pólvora, llegaron las sabuesas, los sabuesos, llegó el terror, llegó la muerte. 54 millones de hombres y mujeres vivían en el vasto continente de las migraciones del Yukon a la Tierra del Fuego y 4 millones al norte del Río Grande y Río Bravo. Cuando llegaron los españoles 50 años más tarde, solo vivían 4 millones en todo el continente y las tierras del río casi se volvieron lo que luego iban a decir que siempre había sido la tierra donde el hombre nunca fue. It is through these lyrical passages that the river recounts multiple coexisting and simultaneous histories. Interwoven throughout the voice of the river are the human stories which intermesh, mingle, and flow out of the river voice, co-narrating the river story. To interplay with just one example here, we have a legacy border crosser, Benito Alaya. Benito's story, along with other stories from the chapter, employ two literary strategies that point to the mixing and enmeshing of the human's transcorporeality with the river in a porous liquid exchange, fluvial, run on and off sentences, as well as interconnected and enmeshed memories that turn collective upon their encounters with the river in motion. Benito begins his story on the banks of the river, contemplating a group of undocumented crossers like himself, dressed in sombreros de patate and ready to work. Todos se parecen, pero Benito Alaya sabe que cada uno va a cruzar el río con un costal de recuerdos diferentes, una mochila invisible en la que solo cabe la memoria particular de cada uno de ellos. Well, I'll let you read the translation. As he contemplates this scene, Benito's mind begins to drift, and his own costal de recuerdos flows in long, winding, and liquidy sentences. Quote, cito, con los ojos cerrados, detenido de noche, del lado mexicano del río, con los brazos abiertos y los puños cerrados, Benito Alaya iba recordando las generaciones de su pueblo. In long river-like sentences that move and interweave ideas and histories, Benito narrates the legacy of border crossing that runs in his family. Generational memories of crossing pulse through Benito as he contemplates his own crossing from the banks of the river. Memories flow like liquid that come and go, connecting and reversing in countercurrents throughout both the narrative and the riverscape, told in long, winding, and fluvial sentences that connect to histories enmeshed inside other infinite histories. One memory encounters the next until a river of memories takes hold of the story, speaking to Benito's countercurrents of liquid past, potential futures, and crossing presents. But Benito's crossing plural past and present realities are also intertwined with the crossing memories of the men waiting alongside him on the banks of the river to cross in the present. As the men stand waiting to cross in the present of the story, cito, del lado mexicano del Río Bravo sentía el miedo de todos y el odio del otro lado. On the Mexican side of the Rio Bravo, he felt the fear of all the others and the hatred on the other side. That is, the past, presents, and futures of border crossers at the river are interlocked. They can feel the collective movement of both fear emanating from the Mexican side and hate waiting for them on the other side, just as it has been in generations before. Crossers move through the river, also in movement, then with a collection of composite histories of their own past presence and past projected onto futures of their own crossings. Together, these collective river stories transcorporeally intertwine and enmesh themselves with human crossing bodies, the moving river, as well as the interlocking and interweaving human and more than human phenomena of border as river and river in ecological crisis. As Blackmore notes, these interacting phenomena, quote, compel a reappraisal of human relations to rivers, particularly in relation to reckonings with river time, end quote. Though rivers may seem to flow forward in a straight linear fashion, there are also moving countercurrents that push waters backwards, mixing both material and time. The river here moves back and forth with the river's past memories and the present day of the novel, and the human stories that weave throughout. To read a river, then, is to read memories of past, presents, and futures at once. A collective and multi-being costal of memories carry multi-being memories that bubble to the surface of its flowing free waters that span both time and place. Fuentes refers to the river in motion, writing in the river's italicized poetic voice from the river's voice. Cito, el río de varios pisos viaja de regreso a sus orígenes. The river of shifting floors now travels back to its sources. Varios pisos here can represent the changes in landscape and elevation that the river travels, but it also speaks to the multi-layered river stream bed with layers of overturned and resurfaced memories that bubble with each flooding of stories and memories, bodies and beings that move through these contested waters. That is, humans in the text recall their own memories filtered through the moving river, and all of the human and more than human implicated phenomena of the riverscape as border barrier. These are dynamic movements of liquid, and they move on river time. Zeke Peña's ongoing series of short stories and comics speak to the confluence of shifting and overlapping fluvial memories of the river. In his urban border community, newer generations do not even remember a river, just the concrete culvert, the same responsible for Sergio's death. Peña writes, quote, "For people born after the 1960s, when the river was transformed into a concrete canal, we've never seen the river between El Paso and Juarez flow naturally," end quote. Instead, the river here is a stream in a concrete ditch below the bridge. Peña's artwork depicts both humans and the river trapped and encased in the border buildup infrastructure of PTD policy. In culverts, behind fencing, squeezed between wires. The images narrate the shattered pathway of the river and humans and more than humans as it moves through the urban borderscape, militarized and constructed. Also depicted in Peña's work, however, are images of both the river and the multi-species riparian community trying to cross, as part of a river that has always seen the migratory movements of humans and more than humans. Juxtaposed with the river's indigenous history of time immemorial, the militarized and hijacked river as border is a bleak image next to images of joy, freedom, and movement of flow. However, a river in movement cannot be contained, as Peña points out. Quote, "The river makes a terrible border," and, quote, "a bad international marker," end quote, as it floods, changes course, and moves. Peña's images portray both the river and the multi-species community that depend on the river in movement as well, as they resist enclosure, erasure, and limits. "The river has always resisted," writes Peña. "It remains unpredictable and wild." In Sergio's joyful play in the culvert, Sergio's joyful play in the culvert is an act of resistance and recognition that the river is more than a border, that a river cannot and will not be contained. Despite efforts to shatter the river's flow and movement, the river and their community continues to seep through and attempts to find joy alongside their banks, as they always have throughout time. The river is animated, agential, and co-creator of these river stories. These stories are, to borrow a phrase from Lisa Blackmore and Liliana Gomez, both literally and metaphorically, quote, "held together by water," end quote. With each flooding and rejuvenation, the river collects more stories. Human stories intermingle with the histories of the river, and bodies literally become enmeshed in an exchange of being, body, and matter. In the human and more than human entanglements at the banks of the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, even dried up or hidden beneath culverts and buoys, the river is vibrantly alive. Rather than stagnant, drying up and disappearing, the river is in constant movement as it weaves its way through and permeates the lives and stories of humans and non-human beings that have interacted with the river throughout time. Reading the river as an agential, alive, and multi-bodied being in these river stories recognizes alternative thinking and future pathways around climate change and the border crisis. The being of the river does not stop at the riverbanks, but seeps into the human and non-human lives and bodies that ebb and flow alongside their waters. And these bodies have been living and dying together with the river now for millions of years. These stories and border communities are held together by water and the movement of the river. Their interactions and constant exchanges of matter throughout fluid time co-create the river and river stories. Maybe if humans remember the sounds of water flowing and continue to resist by engaging in river stories and relationships, the river can eventually make the border disappear. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Please give a round of applause for Kate. That's wonderful, amazing story